Hi, Mr. Tuttle. I'm Julian Smith, and this is my final project on psychology of self-awareness and moreover insecurity. Let's get started. First off, what is insecurity? Insecurity is the lack of confidence about yourself or your ability to do things well, nervous or uncomfortable. And right, that's the dictionary definition. I believe it to be a little more further reaching than that. I think that it's a self-evaluation of one's self-worth against another individual or thing, subsequently exhibiting feelings of perceived inadequacy towards that individual or thing. And as I said in my title, insecurity stems from self awareness and self reflection. That is, that in order to be insecure about a perceived flaw, you have to be aware of that flaw. And even, more so, you also have to reflect upon that awareness, creating that insecurity. And common belief is that insecurity is primarily within physical appearance, whether it being overweight, things of that nature. But it really ranges from, yes, physical appearance, but also to something like mental capabilities or something of that nature, right? A great example of that is the insecurity within relationships, right? So we don't necessarily have the control to know that our significant other is going to stay with us, going, to keep her fidelity with us, and that can definitely lead to a lack of confidence and a feeling of insecurity about that relationship, right? And same applies to job insecurity. Um, so as I just said, insecurity, it's really tied to a lack of control and confidence, and it's more than anything just a destructive form of self-awareness. So who does insecurity affect? Um, Insecurity can affect, more or less anybody, but a lot of people generally think that teens experience it the most, and that does actually have some, fact behind it. So researchers have hypothesized that social awareness and reaction takes place between the medial prefrontal cortex and the striatum pathway. And this pathway is believed to be especially activated during the adolescent development, maybe being able to attribute that to a higher degree of self-insecurity. And as we learned about a lot of things in psychology, a lot of the ways we feel, the ways we think, the way we act are all due to certain aspects of the brain, and insecurity is absolutely no different. However, it doesn't have to end at teens. Girls generally do get more insecurity than males, and I couldn't tell you quite exactly why, but here a couple studies were done. One by Dove, which I'm sure you're familiar with, uh, talked to a few thousand girls and said, most girls had seen more than 77,500 ads by the age of 12. And many of these ads portray, if not all, portray a definite correct figure, what society believes, hey, this is what you should look like, this is what beauty is. And, that definitely leads to insecurity amongst them. And another study found that out of 2,000 girls aged between 10 and 14, both in the United Kingdom and United States, 77% of them actually spoke negatively about themselves. Um, and one other study here is that another United Kingdom study is that about out of 3,000 men asked, half of those men believed they were overweight and they were subsequently insecure about that. Right? So insecurity affects all demographics, all types of people, regardless of age. And more on that is that insecurity affects people because as long as society exists, there will definitely be interpreted shortcomings that go along with how we move, right? So that's to say, 50 years from now, say having a very slender body is no longer perceived as correct, and now it's being overweight. And there's certain people that are going to feel insecure about being slender, right? If the tables were turned. And things that really drive home insecurity are advertising and social media that have an effect at establishing them because they really portray the certain figure, the certain way we should think, a certain capability we should have, and that leads to insecurity. um And confidence is definitely an infectious emotion, right? If you're confident in one thing, you have the belief you will keep doing better in others, and vice versa. If you're not confident that you can do this, you'll be not, you'll lack confidence in other areas as well. So, how does insecurity affect people? So, insecurity is a very relative feeling, right? Each individual experiences it differently because it's all about self-awareness and, recognizing where your shortcomings are, or at least perceived shortcomings. And researchers speculate that there are close, intricate ties to insecurity and depression, but as we'll see, not necessarily mutually exclusive. So Anthony Grant, Josh Franklin, and Peter Langford all co-wrote a book, and they hypothesized that self-awareness and insecurity arise from higher levels of stress and anxiety and increase those effects of those symptoms, right? So it's not to say that insecurity and depression are not tied together at all, but it is to say that insecurity is caused by stress and anxiety rather than depression. Um, and because of that point by Grant, Franklin, and Langford, insecurities will can lead people to social anxiety, or maybe a less extreme form of that, becoming progressively more introverted. Not to say that's bad, but to say I'm extroverted, and progressively to lose that and become more introverted. As I said before, insecurity is definitely relative to the individual. And Frederick Sabunci found that inability to create perfection leads to self-consciousness and in some cases social anxiety, but it's by no means limited to that. And going to that ideal, that perfection, that can be writing the perfect essay, appearing to be perfect in the physical form, much as social media and society play a role in that, it causes insecurities. Can it be prevented? I think one of the biggest things about studying it, or insecurities that is to not only look at what it is, but how it can be stopped, right? So a lot of researchers argue that insecurities can't be eliminated, and I too believe that, but they can be suppressed or overcome. And so from a rational viewpoint, the individual knows that no one can see their insecurities. Insecurities rather are invisible to oneself. And Carmen Cool, who is a former college professor and also a Boulder-based counselor and psychotherapist, basically says that people don't think of you as much as you think of yourself. It's a shortened version of what she said, at least. And that's absolutely true. As I said, insecurity is all about self-awareness and self-reflection. And who thinks about themselves more than yourselves, right? So it's just the nature of humans, but it's also, I think, very important as to recognize that, and that's the first step to overcoming insecurities. And that's my presentation on insecurities. Thanks for watching.